The studio lights were glaring, the cameras were rolling, and the audience was waiting with quiet anticipation. Anyone who has ever tuned into Judge Judy knows that this isn't your average courtroom. It's not the cold, gray walls of a county courthouse. Instead, it's a set designed to look like justice itself lives there, polished wood panels, leather chairs, and the iconic bench where Judge Judith Scheindlin presides with her razor-sharp tongue and no-nonsense attitude. For decades, Judge Judy has built her reputation not just as a legal authority but as an unstoppable force of personality. People don't watch her show just to see cases about broken leases, unpaid loans, or family feuds. They watch because of her. She doesn't sugarcoat. She doesn't tolerate lies. And most importantly, she doesn't let anyone, no matter how bold, loud, or entitled, disrespect her courtroom. That's why what happened that day shocked even the most seasoned viewers. Because on this episode, one woman, who we'll simply call Karen, thought she could outtalk Judge Judy. She thought she could scream, argue, and demand attention like she was the one in charge. And within less than a single minute, she would learn the most expensive lesson of her life. The case itself seemed straightforward at first glance. It involved money, as so many Judge Judy cases do. Karen was being sued for damages related to a business deal gone sour. The plaintiff, a quiet but firm individual, claimed that Karen owed a large amount of money after breaching an agreement. The exact number floating in the claim was $75,000, an amount that would make anyone sweat. Karen wasn't the type of person to quietly defend herself. She strutted into that courtroom with the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Her hair was styled immaculately, her posture screamed defiance, and her smirk suggested that she wasn't taking the situation seriously at all. The moment she sat down, the tension was already noticeable. The audience picked up on it. Judge Judy herself gave Karen one of those classic, sharp glances, the kind of look that says, "You better behave, or I'll cut you down to size." But Karen didn't care. At least, not yet. To truly understand how disastrous Karen's next moves were, you have to understand Judge Judy's reputation. This is a woman who spent over 25 years on television, handling case after case with a mix of iron-fisted discipline and biting sarcasm. She's the kind of judge who can silence an entire room with just one word, baloney. She isn't impressed by theatrics. She isn't amused by excuses. And she certainly isn't intimidated by anyone shouting in her direction. Most people who step into Judge Judy's courtroom know better than to test her patience. Some try anyway, and almost always, they regret it. That's what makes this story so unforgettable. Because Karen didn't just push the line. She bulldozed right past it. The hearing started smoothly enough, with the plaintiff calmly explaining their side of the story. They described how Karen had entered into an agreement, accepted money, and then failed to deliver what was promised. The plaintiff presented paperwork, receipts, and records. Judge Judy nodded along, asking sharp questions, cutting through unnecessary details like a surgeon with a scalpel. She was focused, precise, and clearly unimpressed with Karen's casual demeanor. When it was Karen's turn to speak, things started to shift. Instead of answering directly, she launched into a long, winding speech. She complained about how unfair everything was, blamed everyone except herself, and rolled her eyes more than once. Judge Judy interrupted her, as she often does, with a simple, stern instruction. Just answer the question. For most defendants, that's enough to bring them back on track. But not Karen. She smirked, sighed dramatically, and muttered under her breath loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "Oh, here we go." The audience chuckled nervously. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed. At this point, you could feel the atmosphere changing. It wasn't just a case anymore, it was becoming a showdown. Every time Judge Judy tried to redirect the conversation, Karen grew louder. Every time the plaintiff spoke, Karen interrupted. She raised her voice, gestured wildly with her hands, and treated the courtroom like it was her personal stage. It was the kind of behavior that usually earns a quick warning in Judge Judy's court. But Judy wasn't just irritated. She was studying Karen carefully, weighing every word, every gesture. And then, the moment came. Karen, growing bolder with every second, suddenly snapped. She leaned forward, eyes blazing with frustration, and screamed at the top of her lungs. "Shut up!" The entire courtroom froze. The audience gasped. The plaintiff sat back in shock. The bailiff stiffened, ready to intervene. And Judge Judy, well, her reaction was something no one present would ever forget. Because while Karen thought she had seized control of the moment, the truth was exactly the opposite. She had just triggered her own downfall, one that would cost her $75,000 in less than a minute. The silence that followed Karen's outburst was heavier than stone. Every person in that courtroom knew they had just witnessed something outrageous. Shouting at a judge was one thing, but shouting at this judge was a completely different level of reckless. Judge Judy didn't even flinch. She didn't shout back. She didn't pound her gavel. She simply leaned back in her chair, folded her hands, and gave Karen a stare that could have cut glass. The audience was holding its breath, waiting for Judy's legendary response. It wasn't anger on her face, it was something worse. It was the calm, measured look of someone who knew she had complete control and was about to make a point so devastating that Karen would never forget it. After a long pause, Judy's voice finally broke the silence. Low, deliberate, and laced with icy authority, she said, "In my courtroom, you will not raise your voice at me. Ever." Karen, instead of backing down, scoffed. "Well, maybe if you'd actually let me talk, I wouldn't have to," she snapped. Gasps echoed across the room. Even the bailiff's eyebrows shot up at her audacity. Judy tilted her head slightly, studying her like a teacher watching a student dig their own grave. "You're not here to perform," she said coolly. "You're here to answer questions. And if you can't do that respectfully, then I'll make my ruling right now." Karen laughed nervously, as if trying to shrug off the tension, but the damage was already done. Judy turned her attention back to the plaintiff, asking a few more clarifying questions. The plaintiff answered steadily, presenting clear documents that left little room for argument. Karen tried to interrupt again, but this time Judy didn't even acknowledge her. The judge simply raised one hand slightly in the air, signaling for silence, and the bailiff stepped closer. Karen sat back reluctantly, though her face was red with frustration. Seconds ticked by. The air was so tense it felt like electricity. Judy flipped through the evidence once more, then looked up at Karen. "You had your chance to explain yourself," she said evenly. "Instead, you chose to disrespect this court. Not once, but multiple times. You shouted, you interrupted, and you told me to shut up. That will not fly here." Karen tried to protest, but that's not fair. Only for Judy to cut her off with a swift, "I don't want to hear another word out of you." For the first time, Karen looked unsettled. She slouched slightly in her chair, her earlier bravado fading into visible panic. Judy, however, remained steady. "The facts are clear. The plaintiff's claim is supported by evidence. Your behavior only reinforces the lack of credibility in your defense. Therefore, judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $75,000. The gavel hit the desk with a sharp crack that echoed like thunder. The audience erupted with murmurs, some in shock, others in barely concealed satisfaction. The plaintiff sighed in relief, while Karen's mouth dropped open. $75,000, she shouted, her voice breaking. "You can't be serious." Judy didn't even glance at her. She stood up from her bench, signaling that the case was closed. The bailiff stepped in immediately, warning Karen to remain seated until the judge had left the room. Karen, however, couldn't stop herself. She kept repeating the number as if saying it enough times would make it disappear. 75,000, 75,000? For what? But everyone knew exactly what for. She had walked into that courtroom believing she could outshine, outshout, and outsmart Judge Judy. Instead, her arrogance had burned every bridge she could have walked across. In less than a single minute after she screamed "shut up," she had lost $75,000 and her dignity. The cameras caught everything. The audience at home would later watch the episode with wide eyes, replaying the moment she sealed her fate. Clips would circulate online, people marveling at how quickly arrogance turned into catastrophe. Karen's name would become shorthand for what not to do in Judge Judy's court: disrespect the judge. And the most chilling part? Judy never once raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm, commanding authority did more damage than any shouting ever could. Outside the courtroom, the cameras were still rolling, capturing the aftermath of what had just unfolded. Karen stormed out first, her heels clicking furiously against the floor, her face still flushed with anger and disbelief. She muttered under her breath, throwing her hands in the air as if the entire world had conspired against her. Reporters and producers tried to get a word from her, but she brushed them off, shouting, "This was rigged. Completely rigged." The plaintiff followed a few minutes later, calm and collected, though visibly relieved. When asked how they felt about the ruling, they simply said, "Justice was served. The evidence spoke for itself. That's all I wanted." Their quiet dignity stood in stark contrast to Karen's explosive meltdown. The audience that had witnessed the case inside the courtroom began filing out too, whispering to each other about what they had just seen. Many shook their heads in disbelief, others chuckled softly. It wasn't every day you saw someone practically hand their opponent $75,000 with one careless outburst. Clips from the episode spread quickly once it aired. Social media lit up with comments and memes. People couldn't believe the sheer nerve Karen had shown by yelling at Judge Judy. Viewers replayed the moment again and again, some laughing at the absurdity, others cringing at how quickly her arrogance backfired. "You don't tell Judge Judy to shut up. Ever," one commenter wrote. Another added, "She lost $75,000 in under a minute, that's got to be a record." The story became a cautionary tale, shared online as a lesson in humility and self-control. Karen, however, didn't see it that way. In interviews after the taping, she continued to insist she had been treated unfairly. She claimed the judge had sided with the plaintiff from the beginning and that she never had a chance to properly defend herself. But those excuses held little weight with viewers who had seen the unedited footage. To them, it was obvious, Karen had destroyed her own case with her behavior. She hadn't been silenced unfairly, she had drowned herself out with her own shouting. Judge Judy, meanwhile, remained unfazed. For her, it was just another day on the bench. She had seen it all before: defendants who thought they were smarter than the system, people who thought volume could replace evidence, and individuals who believed the rules didn't apply to them. Karen was just one more name on a long list of people who underestimated her. What made this particular case stand out, however, was how spectacularly fast Karen's downfall came. In less than a minute, she had gone from defiant to defeated. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen had walked into that courtroom thinking her voice was her greatest weapon. She believed that if she was loud enough, forceful enough, she could bend the narrative in her favor. Instead, it became her undoing. Her outburst had not only disrespected the judge but had also erased any chance of credibility she might have had. What little ground she stood on crumbled the instant those two words, "shut up," left her lips. In the weeks after the episode aired, Karen's name became a punchline. People joked about her at work, in classrooms, even at family dinners. "Don't pull a Karen" became shorthand for letting arrogance sabotage your own success. And every time someone shouted or lost their temper in public, the comparison came up again: "Careful, you're about to lose $75,000 like Karen." For the plaintiff, the case was more than just about money. It was about accountability. They had walked into that courtroom hoping for closure, and they got it, not only financially, but also morally. Watching Karen unravel in front of a national audience was its own kind of vindication. They didn't have to say much. Karen's behavior had spoken louder than any argument could. For Judge Judy, it was business as usual. She had always said her courtroom wasn't a stage, it was a place for truth. If someone wanted to put on a performance, she would cut them down. And Karen had done just that, turned a legal proceeding into her own theater show. But instead of applause, she got judgment, and the price tag on that lesson was $75,000. Even years later, viewers still remember the case. They don't recall every detail of the lawsuit or every piece of evidence presented, but they never forgot the moment Karen shouted those two words. It became one of those unforgettable Judge Judy moments, replayed in compilations and shared as proof of why you never test her authority. And for Karen, that moment became a shadow she couldn't quite escape. Every time someone recognized her from the episode, they remembered her arrogance, her temper, and her downfall. That one decision, made in less than a second, defined her public image for years to come. She had walked into court thinking she was untouchable. She walked out $75,000 poorer and with a reputation she could never fully repair. Karen thought the embarrassment would fade quickly, that once the episode aired and people had their laughs, the world would move on. But that wasn't what happened. The clip of her shouting at Judge Judy spread faster than she could ever have imagined. At first, it was just a few snippets on television recap shows, but soon it was everywhere: social media timelines, YouTube compilations, even reaction videos from creators who analyzed every second of her meltdown with mocking commentary. What should have been just one bad day in court became a defining moment. She tried to convince friends and family that the show was edited unfairly, that the producers had twisted the story to make her look bad. But no matter how many excuses she gave, the footage spoke for itself. Millions of viewers saw her temper explode, and no amount of denial could erase what was captured on camera. In her personal life, the consequences ran deeper than she expected. People who once trusted her in business grew distant. Some former associates didn't return her calls. Others outright refused to work with her again, claiming they didn't want to deal with someone so volatile. The lawsuit and the $75,000 judgment weren't just numbers on a page, they became a weight she carried into every aspect of her life. Financially, it left her scrambling. Emotionally, it left her scarred. Meanwhile, Judge Judy continued with her work, unaffected. She moved on to the next case, the next defendant, the next conflict, as steady and composed as ever. That was part of what made Judy so admired by viewers, her ability to cut through nonsense, to stand firm when others fell apart. For Judy, Karen was just another lesson in a long career of showing that arrogance and disrespect have a cost. For the public, though, Karen's outburst was unforgettable. People replayed it not just for entertainment but as an example of what happens when pride takes over common sense. Teachers used it as a warning in classrooms about self-control. Parents pointed to it when teaching kids about respect. Even workplace seminars on communication occasionally referenced the clip, turning it into something larger than just courtroom drama. Karen could not escape it. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her. Sometimes people recognized her, sometimes they didn't, but she always wondered if they had seen the clip. The whispers, the smirks, the quiet chuckles when her name was mentioned, it all chipped away at her confidence. She had wanted to be seen as strong, as someone who stood up for herself. Instead, she became a symbol of what happens when anger blinds judgment. The irony haunted her. All she had to do that day was stay calm, answer the questions, and let the evidence speak. Even if she lost the case, she could have walked away with dignity. But instead, she let her pride control her tongue, and in a matter of seconds, she lost everything: her credibility, her money, and her public image. Time passed, but the memory remained. Years later, compilations of top Judge Judy moments would still feature Karen's outburst. The internet never forgot. Every time the clip resurfaced, the comments were the same: disbelief at her arrogance, amazement at Judy's composure, and laughter at how fast she had sealed her own fate. Karen had learned the hardest way possible that words carry weight. A single phrase, shouted in the wrong place at the wrong time, can cost more than anyone imagines. And in her case, it cost $75,000 and a reputation she could never fully rebuild. Years later, the memory of that courtroom still lingered in Karen's mind like a scar that refused to fade. No matter how much time passed, she could never completely escape the weight of what had happened. The number, $75,000, echoed in her thoughts whenever she looked at her bank account, whenever she signed a contract, or whenever someone raised their voice in her direction. It wasn't just money she had lost, it was a turning point in her life, a moment that reminded her that arrogance can cost more than anyone expects. She tried to rebuild, slowly and quietly. Some people moved on and forgot about her, but enough remembered to make her wary of stepping into the spotlight again. Whenever she met someone new, she wondered if they had seen the infamous clip. Whenever a disagreement started, she forced herself to bite back the urge to snap, because she knew better now. That one outburst had taught her a lesson that no self-help book or motivational speech could ever teach: control of one's words is priceless. The plaintiff, on the other hand, lived peacefully with their victory. They had fought for justice, received it, and carried on with life. For them, the case was just another example of why persistence pays off. For Karen, it became a life-defining event. Two people walked into the same courtroom that day, but they walked out with completely different futures. Judge Judy, of course, continued her career with the same unwavering energy that had made her a household name. For her, the case was just a page in a much larger book. She never dwelled on it, she simply demonstrated, once again, why her authority in the courtroom was absolute. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to argue. She only needed to hold her ground, and the rest unfolded naturally. Her calm demeanor contrasted so sharply with Karen's fury that it highlighted an eternal truth: the one who loses their temper first usually loses the battle. The audience at home took the story with them, too. They remembered not just the entertainment value but the lesson beneath it. Parents used it as an example for their kids: respect those in authority, stay calm under pressure, and never let your pride cloud your judgment. Viewers who had once been quick to anger reflected on how a single moment of rage could unravel everything they had worked for. Karen's fall became more than just television, it became a moral tale replayed in living rooms across the world. In the end, Karen's story wasn't just about money. It was about the power of choice. Every word, every reaction, every decision in that courtroom shaped her destiny. She could have chosen patience. She could have chosen humility. She could have chosen silence. But she chose to scream. And in that instant, the weight of $75,000 fell squarely on her shoulders. The lesson was clear, and it resonated far beyond the courtroom walls: pride unchecked leads to downfall, respect ignored leads to consequences, and a single moment of anger can change a life forever. Karen had entered Judge Judy's court thinking she could control the story with her voice. Instead, her voice betrayed her. And while the gavel came down in just a few seconds, the echo of that moment would follow her for the rest of her life.